Hey there, Facebook friends and followers, as well as our members of our ELA, R, and writing prescription, and especially those of you who are in the CREST online recorded training series this summer. This is CREST Part 2, Lesson 6 on revising. And we're going to be taking two sentences that are consecutive in a paragraph and combining them. So the song that comes to my mind is Come Together Right Now. And we're going to learn in my Mrs. PBC process of elimination sheet that anytime that we change the meaning or something's missing M, that there's repetition or a run-on R, that the subject is missing in the sentence, or it's not S specific enough, PBC, that the predicate is not there, that the point of view or perspective has changed, the PBC, it's too vague, or the verb is missing, or the verb tense has changed, the content is different, or the cups, the basic grammar structure is wrong, then we're going to eliminate those. So when I looked at the high school revising, I noticed that there were two combining sentences. And what we're doing, for those of you who are not familiar, is I'm starting with the bottom of what I'm going to call the arm ladder. And arm for revising stands for add, remove, replace, or move. So I have a series of bracelets. What I'm going to do is two questions, one from ninth and one from 10th grade. Now, the reason I'm doing ninth and 10th grade is twofold. Number one, the only grade levels doing revising and editing right now are ninth and 10th grade. They did one for the spring test. They did one for the summer, which I believe has not been released yet. And they're going to do one more in December. Then they will go back to, they will go forward to the new changes like all of us in either April or May. Now, if you teach third, fourth, and sixth grade, you're going to get two editing passages with about 4 questions each based on the math that I did. If you teach 6th, 7th, or 8th grade, you're going to get about 9 editing and 9 revising questions. So fourth, third, fourth, and fifth is 8 in 2 different passages, editing and revising. And 6, 7, 8 will be 9 in 2 different passages. And ninth and 10th grade are going to be 11 editing and revising passages. Sorry, 11 editing and revising questions inside 2 different passages. So it'd probably be like a 6 and a 5 split for 9th and 10th, and a 5-4 split in the 2 passages for 6 through 8. And in third, fourth, and fifth, they're probably more than likely going to be 4 questions each. So combining sentences. The other reason that I'm doing that one is because it's easier to take content that's already there and just bring it together. The first part of revising was just take a word that is too vague and make it more specific. That was lesson 1. Maybe take a word that doesn't fit the context of a sentence and replace it with one that does. And then we talked about revision, where here's just one sentence and we change the order of the words to something that makes more sense. So this level, revising, part two revising of our 5-part CREST series, lesson number 6, I believe. Thinking it's 6. I don't think it's 7 yet. Been doing so many, I'm getting confused now. Let's take a look and see from my document camera something that you can find at the Dollar Tree. They sell these little hands, and so right where the palm goes, when you're doing revising, you're going to take a passage, introduction, body, and conclusion, and you'll do what we're going to call arm. We'll either add, remove, replace, or move content around. Notice that the S is not there because they don't use substitute on the Texas test. So it's probably important that you change that. Now, if we're doing reading or revising, you can use your arms, because if this is, again, the whole passage, or this is one paragraph, let me look at it like that, and that thumb is the topic sentence, and then your fingers are the specific supporting sentences, and then you have a pinky that's closure, or you have a few more sentences, a few more fingers. All you're having to do is, on the highest level of reading, understand the content of a whole paragraph or a whole passage. But that's very hard. And so when we get to the reading part 3 with constructive responses, we're going to do the same thing that we did with editing and revising. We're going to build from letters to words to phrases to lines to sentences to paragraphs to select to sections to scenes to stanzas, and then of course to the entire poem, play, passage, selection. So if you look at the acronym ARMS here, if life happens at full speed, then think of this saying that reading and writing happen in slow motion, where you slow it down one detail at a time. One way to do that is with reading and revising to understand the content better, is to play in your mind actors, remember, more, sequence, that you act out the order of whatever's being done. If you're having to imagine imagery for reading or revising, then you could use a different set of arms. Artist, remember, more, setting, or of the 5 senses. So the question that I want to look at first is from the 9th grade, and of all the 9 revising questions, this was the one that the students in 9th grade had the most trouble with. It was the lowest performing. So a reminder for those of you who have not been watching any other videos, if you're going to use paper and pencil, which I think you need to once in a while, we don't live in a computer world all the time. They still make trees, and with those trees, they make paper. And so 100% of the time doing online just to me seems boring, monotonous, and your kids are going to become disengaged. So you need to branch out, do things differently. So the paper version of rules would be read, underline, since you can underline anything on a paper document, label, mark it the certain way, eliminate 3 or 2, depending on what kind of question it is. Because now we have that there's more than one correct answer. and then you'll select one in the book and one in the Scantron. If you're taking the online test and they're limiting the amount of annotations that you can do, it would still be read it softly or loudly, loudly in a class setting or a group, but softly with a whisper phone with a partner or by yourself. So if you have students who are saying, I'm not going to read, I'm not going to use the whisper phone, and that's part of your rule, you need to tell them that silence is deadly in a classroom of auditory learners. That if they refuse to do the strategy, then you need to take away some points so that they can't get the maximum amount because they're not doing part of the process. Everything is a process, even a question. So we would read online, understand the question, and the way that you prove that you understand it is that you label things a certain way. And one of the ways to label on the online test is highlighting. Then you'll begin to eliminate and explain your wrong answers. You'll select the correct one. You'll push submit when you're done. Okay. So because all of you from 3rd through 10th grade are going to be getting some revision questions, I highly suggest you join our CREST online trainings so that you can learn how to do these uh, editing, revising, constructed, short answer, and extended essay responses. And for free, I'll be throwing in some regular reading multiple choice questions. This is a regular revising multiple choice question. So let's find out why less than 2/3 of the kids struggle with this one. What is the most effective way? So whenever we say most effective, there's usually at least one distractor to combine sentences 10 through 12. So you highlight, or if you're on paper, you can bracket, and I think to myself, come together right now. So combined sentences 10 and 11, we're going to bring them together without repeating, without changing the content. And I want you to notice that I have some X's here that did 3 things wrong. But before we talk about it, I want to make sure that we see it on the actual passage. We're only going to focus on the one they asked us about. So there it is. I zoomed in. Capital. Because they are so large, comma. So a saying that I have is to start with how, why, where, oh, when, you often put a comma then. In other words, whether this is a dependent clause, which it is or not, whenever you're starting a sentence with how, why, where, oh, meaning opposite or other, when, you often put a comma then. Because they are so large, that has a subject and a predicate. So you can set it off apart with a comma. Then you have the independent clause coming up. The mammoths, plural, likely would have struggled to climb out of the ravine in time period. Capital. That would have made it hard to survive the sudden flooding period. So those sentences are fine by themselves, but if it says revision, we're going to say, okay, let's see if there's a way to make it look better later than it does right now. So remember, we have to do it without repeating, without changing the content. So let's take a look at the answer choices and see if we can figure out some issues. And what I have on my revising graphic organizer, there's your combining sentences. Yellow means don't add or remove anything. All you're going to do is bring them together the best without being repetitious. So there's sentence 10, because they're so large, comma, the mammoths likely would have struggled to climb out of the ravine in time. That would have made it hard to survive the flooding. What I noticed on sentence 11 is that all four answer choices took out the part that said that would have made it hard. So since they all four removed some of the content, then you have to pick the one that keeps the content the most intact without repeating, without being a run-on, without changing tenses or any of those things that I was telling you. And so there's Mrs. VC. We're going to eliminate anything that changes the meaning. If something is missing, well, for this answer, all four of them have that little phrase missing. So we can't eliminate any of them based on that phrase that's out. So we'll look for repetition or a run-on, the subject changing or not being specific enough. Does it not have a predicate? Does it change the point of view? Does it change the verb tense? Is the answer too vague? Does it change the content, or is there a cups, capitalization, usage, punctuation, or spelling problem? If there is, we'll eliminate those three. And the cool thing about that, it looks like an E, and we'll select one. So this Mrs. PVC has come in very handy for students who are trying to analyze the question versus the passage. Their, what we'll call here, their right shoe compared to their left shoe. So since I noticed that all four answer choices got rid of this phrase, let's look and see which one does the best with what is still left. Zoom in close so you can see it. Well, some kids will say gooder. Put my autofocus there. Capital. Because they are so large, comma, bouncing a ball on the table, independent clause, the mammoths, plural, likely would have struggled climbing out of the ravine in time, surviving. Since they changed, that would have been hard to survive. I'm going to put a little X there to see if there's one better, because it sounds like they're going from struggling to climb out of the ravine to surviving, and they wouldn't be surviving the sudden flooding. B, capital, because they are so large, comma, bouncing on the table, the mammoths, plural, likely would have struggled to climb out of the ravine, comma, surviving the sudden flooding period. Again, it sounds like if they're struggling to climb out of the ravine, they would be surviving, and that's not the case. So let's take a look at C, capital. Because they are so large, the animal, the mammoths likely would have struggled to climb out of the ravine. That's one thing, comma, and to survive the sudden flooding. Since there's only two things, struggling to get out of the ravine and surviving the sudden flooding, we don't join a compound predicate with a comma when there's only two things. So we would eliminate that one because of a punctuation issue. So the only one that's left is going to have to be D, capital, because they are so large, introductory phrase slash dependent clause. Whole thing is called the complex sentence, comma. The mammoths likely would have struggled to climb out of the ravine in time to survive the sudden flooding period. So the to survive in time to survive, that sounds like I'm actually not going to make it in this case. So the best one on this answer would have been letter D, but only 64%, a little less than a little more than a third of the kids couldn't see the verb changes or the comma that was placed between only two predicates. Okay, so the second one, I'm going to help you, those of you who uh, are doing more online, want to make sure that I have a strategy for you as well. So again, being the fact that we can't annotate on the real test, I'm thinking and hoping and praying. I'm thinking, comma, hoping, comma, and praying that TA will get their act together along with Pearson and Cambion so that they can make it where the students can annotate and take more notes. But if they can't, there is the note taking section where your kids could write the word rules in the notes. So yes, they can use that part, or some of you have told me you're going to use your acronym or mine, which is fine. Use what works for you. I just don't like any acronyms that don't require the students to open their mouths. So when we're doing it online and we can't underline, then it's understand the question so that you are labeling. So we're going to read this question here, and then we'll read those two sentences in the passage. We're going to understand both the question and understand the passage to the point that we can label or highlight a specific certain way. We'll eliminate 3 when it's time, and we'll select 1. So let's use an orange highlighter. What is the most effective way to combine sentences 8 and 9? 8 and 9 come together right now. And again, most effective means that there's usually a distractor. Okay, so something that you might want to keep in mind is what I told you is that acronym misses PVC, meaning, missing, repetition, run-on, subject, specific, predicate, point of view, verb, vague, content, cups. You got to get to the point where your kids can remember these are all reasons why you would eliminate something. So now that we've labeled here, and again, because um, on my test, I don't have the test side by side with the passage, the questions side by side with the passage. I have to go kind of back and forth. So I'm going to uh, clear my drawings. Just know that I did my strategies. And again, your kids would have those in the note section. So we'll look at sentences 8 and 9. There it is in the second paragraph. So what we should probably do is highlight it again. I'm going to take this sentence, or the attempts, plural, to provide provisions, plural, to the troops, left them weakened, period. Left who weakened? The troops. Capital, troops. So I already heard repetition. Since I already know that troops is my subject in the first sentence, that the troops are weak, I can use a pronoun. So what you might do is if your kids can do it, then probably have them draw what I would call a little brick around repetition. Again, since we can only do highlighting, make sure that they have some sort of mark that on their paper for number 2, they'll write in their line paper when they're taking notes for you doing their strategies, combine 8 and 9. So there's repetition. If I write P for passage and Q for question, P for passage would say repetition on troops. We're also left malnourished and susceptible to disease. So if I hold up 3 fingers, I hear 3 things about the troops. They're weakened, comma, start over here on this side. They're weakened, comma, malnourished, comma, and susceptible to disease. And that is what we're going to call a result of something because they're not getting provisions to them. So sometimes every action causes an equal and opposite reaction. So an action causes a reaction, which causes another reaction. So because of those things happening, they're saying on that last detail, which could be fatal. So whenever you have a comma, it's important that you understand this. You have a comma at towards the end of a sentence. If you say which could be fatal, what you're just saying is we're just adding information to something that we've already tell you, which could be fatal. All of these things that are happening to the troops. So if I'm going to join 2 sentences, the first sentence has one thing about the troops, and the second one has 2 sentences about them. So if I was to join them together and sing that song, Come Together Right Now, I would join them together by combining the items in a series with commas without using the troops twice. And a lot of times students like to use more than one and in a sentence. And so what I noticed on this question, TEA said, let's go ahead and throw some ands, multiple ands at the students to see if they're going to pick more than one and. If you have a bunch of things happening in a sentence, you only want to put your and right before the last one in the series, or else again we have repetition. We have those, we would have a little brick around the word and. So remember that the troops are weakened. The troop is our subject. They're malnourished and susceptible to disease, which causes what to happen? It to be fatal. Because of all those 3 things, it could be fatal. So that we're going to have cause, transition, effect. It could be fatal. It means they could die. So let's see, based on page 2, question 2, which one combines them the best? All right. So again, we're combining sentences what? 8 and 9, keeping in mind Mrs. PVC. Capital, early attempts to provide provisions for the troops left them weakened, and troops. Since troops are there twice, remind yourself I don't want anything that's going to be repetitious, left malnourished, and so now since and is there twice, I'm going to put little bricks there. And so if all your kids can do is highlight, then make sure they highlight. If it allows you to highlight in red, I would suggest that you use a red highlighter to represent red bricks that you can remove. Somebody who's watching this, let me know if on the highlighting on the actual test, if they were allowed to use different color highlighters, because red can be removed, yellow can be caution, and green can be good for go. Uh, so I'm going to probably eliminate that one in my mind. Okay. Uh, Capital. Early attempts to provide provision to troops left them weakened, comma. There's my first item in a series. Left them weakened, comma. Since I'm slowing down, I'm gonna put a little yellow ball there. Malnourished, comma, and susceptible to disease, comma. Because of all those things, which all those things could be fatal. Since that one doesn't have any red, it just has me slowing down with my commas in the series. Three things, two comma, this Oxford comma, and this part of the sentence, which gives me more information about the sentence that it just told me. So this one could be the answer. So we could, if we're doing annotations, then put something to mark it in such a way that allows you to show your teacher, yes, I might pick this one. So if you can't do this annotations on the computer, then it's not going to kill your students to have on their paper 2 A, B, C, D, or up in the notes 2 A, B, C, D, and they can place little X's next to each one and little checks or the commas in a series. Uh, then if you want, they can erase the notes if you're afraid about the computer crashing, which many of you have been. Let's take a look at letter C. Capital, early attempts, plural, to provide provisions to troops left them weakened, comma, troops. So since I have troops twice, I don't want to use repetition. So that's not the best choice. We're also left malnourished and susceptible to disease, which could be fatal. So between B and C, which were very similar, because B has less repetition, because remember the eyeball had look for repetition or look for a run on. Since B has less repetition, then remember what we said. We want the one that's the most effective choice, and a sentence without repetition is more effective than one with repetition. Last one. Early attempts to provide provisions to troops left them weakened, comma, and were also malnourished, and so there's the other repetition of the word and again. Since there were three things, erase that one. You don't have to put a comma on the last one, but we do not want repetition of the word and because there were three things, let's put those three things together and only put the and on the last one, not on this one right here. This one makes the answer wrong. And um, no, we don't necessarily have to have a comma here because of the Oxford comma being optional. Uh, but TA said they were never going to test that one, but I can eliminate it because of the repetition on and. So based on what we see here, the only one with no red, no remove because of things wrong is letter B. So I would say probably more than likely letter B would be the answer that you would submit in your computer entry and double check. It's got the three items. You know, have your kids do some sort of proving their answer. Um, and again, it could be something as simple as here's my three items. They were weakened, they were malnourished, and susceptible to disease. And then it's got the phrase, the which word always means that you're writing a phrase that supports something that you just wrote or something that you just said. So that's what I would say would be the best way to combine sentences. The binder is full of revising passages that are both mixed and at the sentence level and paragraph level. Some of the newer format where they're a little bit shorter, they're typically going to be giving your students uh, editing and revising ER. The emergency room passages will be shorter and they're supposed to both stay on top editing editing to revising, but a little bit shorter. And remember that on editing, you don't necessarily need to read the entire passage. And as you saw on this one that I just finished doing, all I had to do was read two sentences. And so as we work our way up the arm, where we go from a word to a phrase to a line to just changing the order to combining sentences, we're gonna get more kids getting more answers correct if they start with the easier ones and treat a test like a buffet, you know, kind of going around looking at questions because you can go back and forth. You don't necessarily have to do the questions in order. So I think instead of just guessing on an answer that's about a whole passage or a whole paragraph, let's fast forward past those and work on the ones that are just about one word or one line, one phrase, changing the order of one sentence or bringing two sentences together. And then we can start doing all of the text features that are coming up next. But what I'll probably do is, since those were high school combined sentences, my next video will be basically a part two. Uh, lesson 7 will be combining sentences on the elementary level and combining on the middle school level because we have teachers from all levels here. So I look forward to seeing you guys on the next video. For those of you who are not CREST online training people who have not been exposed to editing or revising, remember that's going to be um, quite a few questions. It'll be 8 questions in third, fourth, and fifth, 9 questions in sixth, seventh, and eighth, and 11 questions starting next year in ninth and 10th grade. So yes, all of us need to practice. And what I'm showing you is not the way, but a way to kind of help kids who struggle. And as you saw, the lowest performing question revising for 10th grade was one, all they had to do was combine two sentences. But I think maybe they didn't have somebody like Mrs. PVC to help them along with the question. So there you have combining sentences part A for high school. We'll do part B on our next video. Take care. Share this video with a friend uh, who's trying to learn the concepts of revising. I'll go ahead and share the next one for free as well. I only do that um, once in a while, but because this was the test, uh, I don't sell the test. I just share strategies for free if I'm going to use any test questions, just so you can kind of see how to implement a strategy that works for your kids.